record. This is much better. I can actually record and be captured properly. Ooh. Let me see. Our time is so short. I really hope people come in on time, because by the time you do all these introductions. Oh, good. Oh, Musanda. Nice.
Hi, Jane. How are you?
Hi, Musanda. I'm good. And yourself?
I'm very well. I'm just trying to sort out my children because I don't have house help today. And
Okay.
I'll be back shortly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Morning, Prof. Cheryl. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
Hi,
Yeah,
Cheryl. It's a pleasure to meet you too.
Hi, nice meeting you.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce your first name?
Balkis.
Balkis?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So hopefully people do show up on time. So we'll just give them a few minutes, maybe perhaps up to 5, and then we can start.
Jane, I have a few slides. Am I going to be able to share my slides through the share screen? Do I have that capability?
Yes, let me do that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you should be able to share your slides, but if anything, just shoot them to me via email so that, if you run into problems, I can just share them on your behalf.
Okay. No, they look like they're okay.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening from Nairobi.
Good evening from Nairobi. How are you all the way over there?
Very well, very well. It's been raining. There's a bit of a storm here.
Stay dry.
Indeed. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to lift this up a bit. Just bear with me.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Prof. Ellie. We're all early birds today, so we'll just give people a couple of minutes to join in, and then we can start promptly.
How are you, Jane?
I'm fine, thank you, Dean Alice.
Hi, Cheryl. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a long time, Ellie.
Really
Yeah,
a long
Lovely to
time.
see you as well. How are you keeping?
You know, okay. How about you?
Pretty good as well. It's like for everybody else, it seems like an extra long 2 years.
Exactly. I didn't want to say it, but well, you're teaching, right? A lot, Cheryl, or what do you teach?
Yes, I am teaching, but I'm also chair. So, you know what admin's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of Zoom.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, Keith, it's nice to see you too.
Hi, Ellie. Trying to arrange my stuff around here. Nice to meet you. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Is everyone joining from Canada, just based in Canada, or?
For now, I think.
So far, where are you?
I'm actually in Nairobi.
Oh, fabulous. That's so great. It must be what, late in the day for you?
Green City.
5 o'clock. It's almost 5 o'clock.
Yeah. Jane, are you chairing this?
Balkis will actually be doing the moderation
Oh,
today.
Balkis, will we have time to have introductions? Because I really want to learn more about everyone who's here. I don't know if you had allowed time for that. Can't hear you, you're muted.
Yeah, we did. So basically what we are thinking of is for Alice to kind of do a brief introduction, and then maybe when each one of the presenters are about to present, then I'll just do the introduction, like a little bit of the profile.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what other introduction maybe you're referring to.
Hopefully we'll have time in the discussion to learn more about everyone.
Sure. Yeah.
Hi, Alicia.
Hi, Ellie. It's been so long.
So great to see you.
So
I'm
good to see you too.
looking forward to hearing about what you're up to.
Mhm.
Hey, the announcement for this says Ryerson University. That needs to be updated.
We're still getting used to it. So yeah, it's just been since last week. So
I know.
yeah, yeah. We've just been told not to use X in university anymore.
XU has been superseded by,
Well, yes, you can still use Ryerson, just a slap on the wrist if you use X university.
maybe you should explain for those who are not from Toronto about what went on there.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to be at a university in Toronto that has that was named after Egerton Ryerson, who was a colonialist, the architect of the residential school system with Indigenous people. So quite as a big thing, they've decided to change the name. So during the year, while it was up in flux, we were X University. And now it's a name that I have a post-it note here that reminds me what it is because it's a little awkward. Toronto Metropolitan University, and it doesn't roll off the tongue in any sort of sense. So yeah, so there's nothing like having a school with a new identity as of 6 days ago or something.
Well, names are important.
Okay, I'm giving guys 2 more minutes and then we can start at 10:05, just to keep time. Okay, Belkis, I think we can start, and those who will join us they'll find us.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for a discussion on climate justice, the role of Black environmentalists, organized by the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University. So my name is Balkis Osman, a PhD candidate in environmental studies at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. And I will serve as your moderator for today. So before we start, I would like to inform you all that this event will be recorded. I would also like to give the traditional land acknowledgements. We recognize that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University itself. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Tikaronto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many indigenous people. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, that is the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon, One Pebble Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So to give you an idea of what to expect, basically, the discussion will start with a little bit of introduction by Alice Hovoka, our dean, followed by 30 minutes presentation, 10 minutes each for our distinguished speakers today. At 10:40, we will allow 15 minutes for question and answers and wrap up by 10:55. Just to give this before we start, we are happy to accept question and answers. Everyone can talk. The chat box is also there. So we are also happy to read questions from the chat box. Thank you very much. So Alice, over to you now.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. It's lovely to see you all here. Our EUC community is committed to addressing anti-Black racism and to facilitating an EUC culture and practice that we want to be fully attentive to equity, diversity, and inclusivity. And our efforts and our broad approach are meant to be restorative, hopeful, and tangible in pursuit of systemic change. I'm really excited about today's fourth EUC dialogue in a series that reflects key themes of our EUC Black Inclusion Action Plan, focusing on knowledge creation and community engagement. And specifically, this event aims at highlighting diverse Black voices, practices, and experiences related to climate action. It reflects one step among many in our efforts to dismantle systemic racism and enable equity and inclusivity in our pursuit of a just and sustainable future. I offer my heartfelt thanks to Jane for organizing today's dialogue, and to Balakise, Musonda, Cheryl, and Alicia for honoring us with their time, energy, and insights. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Alice, for this brief introduction. So for now, I would like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Alice Richens. She's a sustainability and social impact consultant who works with forward-thinking organizations, basically to assess, amplify, and truly embed their desired social and environmental impacts. Alice is well invested in partnerships to achieve sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement. She currently works at the Common Approach as partnerships and standard lead, where she's building out the data infrastructure, basically to capture and recognize the impact that local organizations have in terms of societal goals. And to our second speaker here, I have Professor Cheryl Tilekson, who is a professor in sociology at Ryerson University. I'm kind of disappointed myself to say Ryerson University right now, but I don't know if this is the time to say it. So Professor Tilekson's research over the last 20 years has focused on examining the relationships between environmental justice in Canada here and concerns for social inequality. So for now, Dr. Tilekson has also participated in a number of SHRIC and CIHR-funded grants, and authored quite a number of publications in the areas of environmental justice and racialization in Canada. Her research actually uses qualitative and quantitative methodologies to explore areas of her interest, including issues on community-based topics. So for our third speaker for today, we are really happy to have Musunda Mumba, who is the director of the Rome Center for Sustainable Development. It's such a pleasure to have you here, all the way from Rome and Kenya, Nairobi. So Musunda's work actually focuses on climate change, sustainable development, and nature protection. In her role, she actually provides strategic leadership on these matters by convening and collaborating and also connecting and co-creating the world as we see now, knowledge in the world as we see now, within complexities and uncertainties. She is also the chair of Global Partnerships on Forest and Landscape Restoration and the vice chair of the Collaborative Partnership on Forest. She has over 25 years of experience in environmental and conservation issues globally and has published widely in high impact journals, newspapers, and contributed to books as well. So I would like to conclude by saying Musunda holds a PhD in wetland conservation and hydrology from University College of London in UK. So we have our first presenter now, who is Alicia Richens. Alicia, so over to you now.
Thank you
Alicia
so
will
much.
Sorry, I just
Oh,
wanted
go
to
ahead,
say that
sorry.
Alicia will be speaking to us basically to share with us some of her experiences regarding challenges, opportunities, you know, that is there for up and coming environmentalists and climate change activists from racialized and Black communities here in Canada, which we think is also applicable to other, you know, racialized groups in other parts of the world. So Alicia, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia, and it's great to join you today. I'm actually not in Toronto. I am calling from Mohkinstsis, also known as Calgary, Treaty 7 territory, as I'm on a bit of a digital nomad journey across the country. It's so good to reconnect with the faculty. I see so many familiar faces from my old days at Faculty Council, even though I know we're EUC now. And so I guess I can start with a bit about me and my background. So I was born in Toronto, but grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the home of my parents. And I think that very unique experience of being a dual citizen since birth really piqued this curiosity in me about the world. Why was life so different on this tiny island that I lived on versus this big country that I was also somehow a part of? I also was very privileged as a child. My father was a pilot, so we got to travel a lot. And so I got to see firsthand as well the different experiences and access to opportunities around the world. And I always complained that life just didn't seem to be fair, that, you know, things just weren't fair, things weren't equal, things weren't equitable. Why was opportunity so different for everyone? And I would always complain about it, and my parents did not know the seed they were planting when they said, well, you'll grow up and you'll fix it. And so I kind of internalized that a lot. I got involved in Model UN as a student in high school, and then when I started at York in my undergrad days, the York Model UN team as well. I kind of fashioned myself a future Secretary General of the UN, which, you know, it's not off the table yet, but just really piqued this curiosity about the world and the different experiences we had. I started at York in undergrad studying economics, thinking of it as this sort of central engine of the world, of how we operate society, how we distribute and allocate resources, how we decide on, you know, the material needs that we need to survive. And it was in my very first year, I took this Introduction to the Social Economy course, and it just blew my mind, just thinking more about those externalities that economics just writes off as externalities, and how can we dive deeper into that and understand the manufactured inevitability of the system that we live in, and the potential to do differently. So I got really into it academically. It also really confused me. I changed my major like 5 times in undergrad. I was determined at one point to do the interdisciplinary studies major, where you get to kind of design your own curriculum, and I thought I was going to like map out a whole different way to like, you know, manage the economy. And I met with Peter Victor for the first time in undergrad, and he said, I don't know why you think you're going to do this in the next 3 years. I've been doing this for my whole career. So that was a really humbling and sobering moment, but I was really glad to then be able to connect with Peter again when I did my master's. And with Ellie as well, who's on the call in the ecological economics program, and really thinking about how can we reorient the way that we manage the economy to really fit within the planetary boundaries. How can I personally connect that back to work in the Caribbean? I was also really involved in the planning and international development pieces of it. In grad school, I did an internship at the Inter-American Development Bank that was really gratifying. And it was one of those key experiences that really highlighted for me that there is a role for me to play in this space. You know, there is a demand or a need for this work, and I could get a job doing that kind of thing. And then after graduation, I eventually landed working in a private foundation downtown for a bit. And I would hear a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, they were definitely in vogue at the time. By the time I graduated, they had been launched, but nobody really knew what to do with them. And so I kind of had this seed planted of this idea of how I could help organizations to localize the SDGs. And during that time, of course, the pandemic started and I needed to get a new job. And I was really just networking around this idea of how do we translate the work that's happening at the local level to really funnel the impact that's happening, because it's really the organizations at the local level that are achieving sustainable development. Yes, we have this really this barrier of data sharing and collection and aggregation back to the national level where, you know, the actual progress is being measured. And so I learned about the work of the Common Approach to Impact Measurement, where, like Balikisu mentioned, is really building out this digital infrastructure of impact data sharing without the kind of historical power dynamics where the funders in the world get to tell everyone else how to do it. How do we empower organizations to do impact measurement in a way that's relevant and useful for them, but still rigorous enough to power that that data aggregation and sharing. All that to say, I've been on a bit of a whirlwind journey, and I also want to acknowledge the privilege of my journey as a young Black person, but also someone who benefits from class privilege. You know, I think I was asked to talk about challenges, barriers, and opportunities. And I think one of the really key challenges is just being able to articulate or recognize the intersecting or the intersectional experiences of young Black people, and just the expertise of lived experience across the lines of race and class and climate and gender and all these other things that are happening. I think, you know, in present day now, one of the opportunities is the way that climate justice is becoming, you know, more in vogue than just your mere climate action, and really understanding the historical wrongs that have led us to this challenge today. And so it's a really interesting time to kind of be at the time where things are shifting. I think historically it's been hard for, you know, the environmental movement, I think we know, has historically been very white, very lacking a class consciousness. And it's been really hard to articulate the ways that, you know, the experience of climate change intersects with other negative experiences in our world. And also the expertise that comes from that lived experience. I think historically, you know, young Black people tend to be excluded from the environmental work of organizations, but of course, a lot of that is changing. Some of the barriers that are still here, however, is really heavy reliance on volunteerism, which is really inaccessible for people who have to, you know, make a living to pay their rent. Lack of funding for initiatives started by Black youth, though again, that's been shifting recently. I think one of the silver linings that we've all seen in the pandemic is the way that the funding landscape has shifted to really focus on trust-based philanthropy and just give people the money to do the work that they're already greatly doing. One double-edged challenge and opportunity that still exists is tokenization. And it's not always a great thing. I remember, as an undergrad student at York, I was on the Senate Executive Committee, and that was a really heightened experience of tokenization for me, just being the only Black person in the room, being the youngest person in the room in this very tense time of the strike of, which one was it? I think it was 2015. And just kind of, yeah, just kind of being very invisible but hyper visible at the same time. Everyone wanted to acknowledge my presence but not actually listen to my words in the room. And that was really tough. But then on the other hand, coming out of university into the world, the way that tokenization is still difficult and still hard to manage, it's also a bit of an opportunity as people are trying to present themselves as being more climate just, present themselves as, working on anti-Black racism. And so you get these opportunities that get you into the door. And I think one of the challenges, of course, we talk about imposter syndrome all the time, and the fact that it's really not on us individually. It's basically the system has told us that we are not good enough. And so I think, the imposter syndrome comes up with tokenization and starting to feel like you're only there because you're Black, or you're only there because you're young, you're only there because you're a woman. And that's not good, but it's okay to take advantage of that opportunity and still show up there, find ways to show up fully as yourself, and to really contribute to the conversation. I feel like I am rambling a bit now, but I will close with just saying that, the challenges are still there, things are still shifting, and there are opportunities in that shift as we move into a deeper recognition of climate justice versus climate action, as we expand the consciousness around intersectionality and the intersecting crises we live in. I mean, it's really hard today waking up hearing about Roe versus Wade in the States right now, and how all of these things impact us every single day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alicia, for such an interesting share of your experiences. And actually, the issue of funding is a key challenge. We all know the fact that it's not that there are no money, like it's that the funds are there, but it's very disappointing that it's mostly targeted at specific, initiatives and it's also being racialized to some extent. So at this point, I will invite our second speaker, who is Professor Cheryl Tilexen. So Professor Tilexen will share with us, some of their experiences when it comes to research, academic work, and how thought leadership can in some way help us recognize and acknowledge issues of race and environmentalism. Thank you very much. So over to you, Cheryl.
Okay, I'm going to share some slides just to sort of keep me on point a little bit, given that there's not that much time. I'm hoping is oops, I seem to be having some problems on my end here. Sorry about that. I'm having some difficulties on my end. So are you guys able to see my slides?
Yeah, we can see it now, but I think probably you can. Okay, good. Do that.
You can make it full screen, maybe.
Yeah, for some reason, when I'm sharing my slides on my screen, my monitor is actually going black, so it's a little disconcerting. So there's nothing like, you do this all the time, and then all of a sudden you get the opportunity to do it, and it's not working. So I am.
So yeah, maybe probably.
Okay, I will do it this way. Okay, so my apologies for the delay here. So I'm going to start off by situating myself a little bit, a little like Alicia. I'm somebody who not only works as a professor, but I enjoy, which is also kind of an anomaly, spending a lot of time in the outdoors. So there is the advantage of seeing me here in the Canadian Rockies, not too far from where Alicia is located. And what I see is, and what's also really important to the work that I do, is to acknowledge myself as being a racialized settler and what that means within the Canadian context, and doing environmental justice work. With my work as well, I also feel that it's important to acknowledge the ancestors and a lot of the key people in the field of environmental justice who have been important to defining the work that I do, and as I do work as a mentor in the field. I've been asked today to talk about issues relating to the challenges facing Black and racialized people in regards to climate change and the environment. And I draw off of environmental justice as a theoretical framework, as well as issues relating to Black ecologies and Black geographies as my theoretical framework. And a big part of the work that I'm doing that is similar to what Alicia spoke about is connecting the dots to a certain extent. And now that there's so much more discussion about anti-Black racism, and acknowledging the impacts of systemic racism is also to make connections to issues such as health inequalities as well, the labor market concerns, problems of policing. So all of these things are really significant connections that I try to draw in my work. And most recently during the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement also became a key catalyst for me to rethink a lot of my scholarly work around environmental justice. And I like this image in particular because it kind of draws attention to what Black Lives Matter highlighted in terms of the importance of our identities, and calling attention the issues of privilege. So with the young Black woman, we get to see her intersectional identities and her concerns about how she's positioned, as well as the white young lady who acknowledges the fact that she also has a role to play by being conscious of issues of privilege. The environment. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but your slides are not quite advancing. So I know you were just referring to
one, I think.
I think you might be number 5 or so in your slide deck, and we're not seeing it. So just so you're aware.
Okay. My slides are not advancing. Okay. So perhaps I'll just speak to my talk instead, so that you guys can at least see me. And my apologies for this. It has something to do with the monitor that I was using. So in terms of looking at the environmental justice movement, a lot of the analysis that I do as an academic is to highlight the issues of color blindness that exist, particularly within the Canadian context. For a long time, to treat the environmental movement much like multiculturalism, and to assume that everybody had equal access and that there was a certain level of fairness, was embedded into the environmental justice movement. And particularly within Canada, then, to highlight the significance that race mattered was something that was often debated as to whether or not class was more important or race was more important in regards to environmental risk. So when the Black Lives Matter issue came to the forefront a couple of years ago, a lot of environmental organizations were turning to academics, such as myself, to talk about the significance of anti-Black racism and to start thinking about how they needed to make connections to systemic racism and to change their policies. And advocating then to shift towards looking at concerns for social inclusion, to look at the role of power in regards to the environmental movement became very important to what they were doing. The environmental justice as an integrative framework has been really key to my work because it allows me to make sort of connections and to see everything as interrelated. And this is, I know, a foundational framework of the work that happens at York to see the fact that the environment is everywhere and to see that issues of systemic racism function in the labor market, in where we play, and in all sorts of contexts. The types of things in my own research that I've been advocating is that as we talk about being environmental stewards, environmental stewardship can also be tied towards initiatives that seek to improve the livelihood of Black communities and Black countries as well. So for example, if we're looking into doing deep retrofits, these deep retrofits should not just be taking place in the obvious places, like in more affluent high-rise towers, but they could be located in places where there's opportunities for green job training and to improve the situation of marginalized housing. So balancing doing the ecological work as well as doing work that will socially advance, particularly the needs of Black communities. Another sort of key piece to my research of late has been to advocate for the importance of race-based data. And this is something that has been really sort of contentious in the Canadian context because we, again, have tended to be very sort of colorblind and have been somewhat assumed that to be progressive was not to ask people to identify their racial identities. The pandemic and COVID has highlighted that having race-based data is key to policy changes and to moving forward in regards to change. So using race-based data as the starting point to look at evaluative frameworks and to be able to measure how particular interventions in regards to climate justice, whether or not they're working or not, and which social groups are benefiting has been sort of key. The last little bit that I want to talk about that it has been sort of key to the work that I've been doing in regards to environmental justice has been to contribute to discussions that lobby for policy change. And as was highlighted before, a lot of that change potentially takes place at the local level, but you know, it's important to make connections to different Black communities, in this case, across Canada. And one organization that I have been involved with to a fair amount is called the Canadian Coalition for Environmental and Climate Justice. This was an organization that was started up by a scholar, Ingrid Waldron, as well as Nello Charles. And they have also been key players in another environmental initiative that's called the Black Environmental Initiative. And they have contributed to supporting federal legislation around environmental racism. So the most recent version of that bill is called BC 226. And this is making its way through the House of Commons. It had started to make its way through the House of Commons last fall, and then the election was called. And everybody had to sort of start from scratch. But what we have through those two organizations I mentioned are alliances between academics and environmental groups. And I think that's the important piece that those who are in the academy and Black academics can do is use empirical data to just support policy changes and activism in the field. And by now working to support this bill that is in its process and is going through the first reading in the House of Commons, now being led by Elizabeth May, there is the opportunity to also further struggles against anti-Black racism as well as environmental racism. So I'll end there, and apologies again for my technical difficulties at the start.
Actually, it's okay. Thank you very much, Cheryl. I mean, such a wonderful presentation, because we all know, but it's just very good that you highlighted on these two key points of, the importance of data and the fact that lobbying and activism, is key between academics and other people working in the field, because we cannot see the policy change if the academia is not connecting with those who are in the ground. So thanks for that. So in the next 10 minutes, we have our next presenter, who is Musondo Mumba. And just to add, Musondo is also a senior advisor at the UN Decade on Ecosystems Restoration, Nature, Climate, and Energy, which is a program of the UNDP. So in the next 10 minutes, Musondo will be sharing with us some of the tips, like for environmentalists and Black environmentalists in particular, and climate change activists on issues of processes of navigating the labor market, beyond the local level. I mean, there are so many opportunities that exist at the global and regional level. So it's high time young and up and coming environmentalists, capitalize on some of these opportunities to make change, not only at the local level, but also globally. So over to you, Musonda.
Thank you so very much. I think that the beauty of speaking last is to say, I like what the last speaker said, and you can go home now. But thank you so much, Elisa and Cheryl, because you really just set the scene for what I'm going to talk about. And I'm hoping I can take less than 10 minutes, but also just share my experience, because unlike both previous speakers, I work within a multilateral system within the United Nations. And having worked there for 13 years now, and really also experienced racism firsthand as an ecologist, as a Black woman from the global South of Zambian and South African heritage, and with some very strange sounding names. So as you can imagine, I walk into a room, I stand on a podium, and they're like, Musunda, Masindi, how do you pronounce your name again? And I just tell people, please do not say Musunda, because Ukusunda in my native language from my father's side means to pee. So, and then they all laugh and giggle, and that has to some extent also worked to my disadvantage, in the sense that there's always an expectation that you should have an English name. Just, we can begin there. Anyhow, so I left Zambia in 1997 as a 20-something-year-old and moved to Switzerland to work with WWF. And it was incredible, because it was the first time I was interacting in a country and first time to see snow and being away from home and seeing, a few hours of light and extreme darkness. I had never, ever in my life dealt with anything related to depression. And so just learning and finding myself in a totally new environment and trying to understand. And for those of you that know WWF, the Panda, brilliant conservation organization, but unfortunately in the 90s, predominantly white, predominantly male. And so here I am in Switzerland trying to figure out and understand myself. And then fast forward, I decided to leave, literally mainly because I was in a meeting where someone said, oh my God, you only have a degree from University of Zambia. That's not good enough for you to sit on this panel. And really, I mean, University of Zambia, which university is this? And I quit my job, and I had no job within 3 months, but fortunately within those 3 months, I managed to get a scholarship and went and did my PhD at University College London. And when I came out and emerged out of London and went back again to WWF UK, I made a request that I move to any of the regional offices on the African continent, because I wanted to see conservation really from a real and authentic lens on the African continent. And I moved to Nairobi, Kenya in 2006 and have been here since. In fact, last year in my new role in Rome, I was shuttling back and forth, but I've since then left that role, and I'm now a senior advisor on the UN Decade. I want to touch a little bit on what both Cheryl and Alicia also mentioned too, this element of coloniality and how the skewedness of information and how it works to the disadvantage of marginalized groups. And I'll give a couple of examples. For those of you who may follow me on LinkedIn, I did an article called 12 Years a Diplomat. And I really talked about my journey as a diplomat, working through the UN system, but also navigating its complex corridors and ways. And one of the things I advocated for, and I really did not even encourage, was the fact that I would refuse to have unpaid interns, because a lot of these interns happened to be white and also came from a space of privilege. Their parents would pay for them to come. But the Black intern who was potentially even more qualified could not come because they could not even afford a flight ticket. And so you begin to see the skewed nature of these spaces. Now in present, in the work that I'm doing, looking at multilateralism, sustainable development goals, et cetera, and just the climate change conversation. We're going to be having an Africa COP at the end of this year, early November, in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And you can begin to see, so I've worked with a lot of young African activists. And I mentor a lot. Vanessa Nakate, Oladesu, Elizabeth Watuti, name them. And both young men and women. And so one of the things that we've really tried, and I'm working with several other ladies, to really support them, because they're walking into spaces that a lot of times are speaking from a mitigation perspective. But when you look at Africa, you're really talking about how do we adapt? And just a few days ago, I was chatting with a friend over dinner. I love to cook. Now that COVID is sort of waning, so I'm inviting a few sisters and we brainstorm. And one of the challenges, I'm trying to work on an op-ed and really challenge the issue of language. The challenge, and Sherry, you did touch a bit on that, the issue of when we have things like net zero, nature positive, what does that actually mean? So one of the things I did when I was the chair of the Global Partnership on Forest and Landscape Restoration, I said, in my language, when you say umuti, you mean medicine. When you say umuti, you mean trees, the same word. So we're circular people. We're ingrained within our natural environment. We're not detached from it. And so even the language that's used within spaces like the United Nations has to be cognizant of some of these skewed ways in which it's been used and the problems that it presents on that. And one of the things that I would like to sort of mention as an opportunity, one of the things I've done, I mean, I've been speaking at several events globally, and one of the things I did over the last 3 years, I started to say no to many speaking engagements and say, look, I am not the only Black woman who can talk about this. I will give you a name and I'll give you a location, and I'll give you who they are. And so in 2019, I set up the Network of African Women Environmentalists, and I'll send you just a link in the chat and you can have a look at that. To really just stop talking about the numbers and statistics. And really, I can give you a name of a woman who's working in the Sahel, in Mali, on A, B, C, and D, who's working in Guinea, in Mozambique, in Angola. And we need to be purposeful about positioning and really making sure that a lot of times when I've been on panels, even within the UN, they say, oh my God, we cannot find good candidates because they're just not any good people, Black people. And that's being lazy, totally, absolutely, and utterly lazy. And so we changed that. And then lastly, but not the least, so what I also did on a personal level, I reached out to 2 girlfriends of mine. One of them is Kenyan, Acheng Butler, and another one is Rwandese Ugandan. And we set up a platform, and you can find it on YouTube. We call ourselves We 3 Queens of Africa, the 3 kings, but we were the 3 queens. And we started interrogating the space. You talked about it, Alicia, on imposter syndrome. We talked about being, the only person that, the token Black woman. Micheline worked in Brazil, and she's a tall, nearly 6 foot, dark-skinned woman working in Sao Paulo for the World Bank. And every time she was jumping on a plane, they'll be like, oh, you must be the girl from the Mardi Gras. I mean, no, I work for the World Bank. That's why I'm sitting in business class. Like those judgments. And so how do we navigate all those spaces? And we see it more and more in environmental spaces. And so we're also, for me, I'm really being purposeful about challenging the language, because the language in the global north, or what we refer to as Annex 1 countries, is a totally different narrative versus what we have here on the continent. And then lastly, but not the least, we inhabit or have the only healthiest lung of the planet, the Congo River Basin. It's the healthiest of them. Amazon, cannot talk about it. Look what's happened in Indonesia with the ban on palm oil. I mean, who talks about that? Other places, Peru, Colombia, tropical forests, they are limping and they are really problematic, but the Congo is intact. And there are parts of it, of course, that are problematic, and there's a lot of illegal wood that's emerging out of the Congo. How do we begin to shift the narrative to say we do not want leakage and illegal wood going into Europe? So how do we create for someone to be in that space and to be at that table to say, this is what's happening, this is how my continent is being, damaged, and this is what we're seeing here. So we're very purposeful I'm very purposeful personally in just making sure that depending on speaking engagements, roles, jobs, whatever, we're positioning a number of activists to be in those spaces. When we're not there, when you're not at the table, you're part of the menu. And it's as simple as that. And either you're present or you're not present at all. And so we need to be very mindful of how we do that. And lastly, not the least again, on your point, Cheryl, on the policy things, sitting in the UN, a lot of policies are made in spaces that are hardly inclusive. And so we need to either call it out and say, look, whoever is making this policy, it just doesn't make sense. You can say it's a gender mainstreaming, gender sensitive, or gender, whatever the word, but it could be 10 men. And I've sat in those spaces before. and it's quite shocking when you experience it the first time. And then suddenly you're like, okay, I need to do something about this. And sometimes you may have to make a very unpopular stance. And it could cost your career. It cost my career several times over. And I'll end there. Over.
Thank you very much, Musunda. Such an interesting share of your experience. For me, it's just the first point you mentioned, not the issue of you and not paying interns. It's a huge problem for us Africans. I remember I have always dreamt of, landing myself in the UN as someone from a rural area with no privileged background. But whenever I see no pay for our interns, I mean, it just takes me off, because there's no motivation. I want to do something I'm passionate about and I will not get paid. How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to eat? So it's good you mentioned this. And we're also happy that you highlighted on the fact that, we need to challenge the language of these multilaterals. It's not only UN, even the World Bank, DFID, they all use certain languages that needs to change. And the last thing on, mentoring and recommending other equally good African young girls, women for speaking engagement. That's what we need. We need a lot of people like you to mentor us and most of those upcoming environmentalists to take up similar opportunities. And I'm happy you mentioned it. So thank you very much, all our speakers. For now, I think we will open up for question and answers. Please, we can take 2 questions at a time. And we are also happy to read all comments or questions posted in the chat box. So yeah. Anyone? Oh, yes. Go ahead, Alice.
Thank you. I'll just jump in and get us started. Those were some wonderful remarks. Thank you so much, all of you. I would love to touch on Alicia's idea of tokenism, or perhaps that even links to Musunda's idea of being present, that you need to be at the table. And I wondered, Alicia, first of all, how is that tokenism manifested in terms of workload and expectations for you, being young, being female, being Black, carving a justice path? What does that look like, maybe at your stage of career? Perhaps the others could join in based on where they are.
Yeah, there's this idea of the magical Negro that can do all the things, and that definitely shows up a lot. It's a bit of a double-edged sword for someone who's also like passionate about the work and wants to contribute to the work, and like how do we hold space for ourselves to how to separate ourselves from our labor and our productivity while still holding that space. But yeah, tokenism shows up in many ways, and always being asked to do the work that nobody else wants to do, always being assumed that you're going to be the one taking minutes today, you know, volunteering, getting voluntold for things without really asking for it. And so I think, you know, one of the ways that I try to deal with that, both in the workplace and in the spaces where I do volunteer now that I can volunteer, is really asserting boundaries and being really clear about what can happen and what I'm not willing to, you know, expand and spread myself so thin for.
Thanks for the response, Alicia. So we are still opening up for the questions and answers. So if anyone here wants to ask any questions specifically to any of our speakers, or any broader question on, you know, race, environmentalism in Canada, broadly around the world, in Africa, you know, we are still open up for questions and answers. It looks like there's nothing in the chat box right now. Yeah, so maybe I can just before someone comes in, I can also just ask this question of you know, and Musunda, to you specifically on the issue of not paying interns. I don't know if WWF you know, pays interns right now. I'm not sure. I just wanted to ask. And UNDP, I know UNDP is also #1 for not paying interns. So in the case of Kenya, in UNDP, what has been the progress? And even UNEP, you know, UNEP. I just wanted to ask if there are any comments on that. No.
Right. WWF, when I was there, we did pay interns. We did, for sure, because when I moved to the region, I actually did make sure that the interns were paid, and it was, you know, civil society organization, and you wouldn't want your reputation to be tarnished. But the UN is very interesting because, you know, we have secretariat. When I worked for UNEP, which I actually still work for, except I'm just loaned to UNDP. UNEP is secretariat, and within secretariat, the rule has always been that do not pay, basically. And it's a terrible thing to happen, and it's being discussed big time as high up as the General Assembly. It's because it's just unfortunate. UNDP, which is a non-secretariat agency, does pay interns. In fact, I had a couple of interns in Rome that I hired and they were paid. And we even had one African there who was studying in Rome. And so for us within the UN is really to be very strong about it and advocate against this change to happen, because otherwise it continues, then it just becomes, you know, it begins to skew. Because what also happens is that when people come in and enter from a global north country as an intern, very quickly, if you're Swedish, you just speak to your government and the government finds a junior professional role and they pay for you and you continue in your diplomatic career. But the African will never have that same opportunity. So that's why there's quite a number of junior professional roles that a number of the northern-based countries are actually funding so that they can be people of color in those roles. Otherwise, they would never have the opportunity. And even one of the things I've been doing, and several of us are, you know, kind of organized, is also to help young people prepare for these interviews. A lot of times people are not aware how to go about competency-based interviewing. Very interesting and very specific to the UN kind of.
I know. I agree. Yeah.
So
okay,
you know, you may not have that opportunity. Yeah. Over.
Thanks very much. We have, I think, Joyce Clue here, and there's one comment question in the chat box. Maybe Joyce, let me take the one in the chat box and I'll get back to you shortly, okay? So Ellie would like to hear more about movements to protect the Congo Basin. Yeah, I know, Musunda, you mentioned that. So maybe because you just finished talking, you can highlight on that for us. Basically, what some of the movements, you know, working now to protect the Congo Basin, DRC.
Yeah, so it's twofold, and I'll be very quick about it. There's been twofold. So there's been a lot of activism about the Congo that's been happening, which is really, really great, but also because the Congo has a lot of indigenous peoples. And the basin itself is much more than just Congo, DRC, and Congo. It goes all the way to Gabon, all the way, including Zambia, where I'm originally from. And so a lot of the work is also around the sourcing of timber from there, you know, a lot of palm oil, a lot of wood, and 50% of wood that goes into Europe, into the EU, just the European Union, is illegally sourced, 50%. So now one of the things that, policymakers right now, as we're speaking, and you can check it online, there's the World Forest Congress that's happening in Seoul in Korea. And this Congress is now also beginning to advocate big time on traceability. When you walk into a store in Paris, in Rome, in London, wherever, you need to be able to know, oh, this piece of wood, okay, so where is this coming from? And now with the internet, there's a lot of exposure on knowing that, no, this has been illegally sourced, and this is happening, and it's this location. And now also with Earth observations, you're in an academia. With Earth observation, NASA Harvest is doing a fantastic program, just looking at the whole landscape and shifts and dynamic of just some of the concessions that have been given. So this is also beginning to at least provide insight into how much is extracted, how fast it's getting extracted, how quickly it's getting lost, etc. And then in comes the UN. There's a big program there called CAFI, C-A-F-I, which is a massive program that just looks around the protection of the Congo Basin. But lastly, I want to also say part of the other challenge is that the conversation in Annex 1 countries or Global North countries is around carbon credits. You go to a village and start talking to somebody, oh, this tree is so important because of carbon credits. Honey, what are you talking about? It's like, no, this is where I get my food. This is where I get my medicine. This is where I get my mushroom. This is where we do the circumcision ceremony. This is where we do this. And It's everything.
Yeah.
Than just carbon credits. So the language also matters as well.
Yeah, language matters. Back to the language again. Thanks. So now, Joyce, I think, you can ask the question now. And we still have a few minutes open up for question and answers and before we wrap up. So just in case anyone has a question, Joyce, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And well done to the speakers. Very, very informative session. I am a young environmentalist, also based in Nairobi as Musonda. And when I saw she was coming to speak on this, I said I had to be present because she's somebody close to me as well. So I relate so much more on what Musonda you were talking about. And my question is, you mentioned being bold and occupying space, taking up your space. And sometimes I've been in those situations where in the work environment, as a young Black person, you're expected to take certain roles that are not even what part of what you're supposed to be doing, like taking minutes, maybe being told to do certain things that are not even part of your TOR and all that. But if you are going to deny taking them, it can cost you your contract. So, and not everybody has the luxury of costing their career. As you mentioned, it has costed you your career. Some of the things has costed you your career several times. Not everybody has that luxury, because even coming across employment opportunities in many of these developing countries, Kenya, one of them, is not easy. So how do we navigate these spaces, being bold, being able to just air out your views and opinions without suffering the repercussions? Over.
No, thank you very much. And I'll also connect that question to Nikki's question in the question there. No, thank you so much. And I really want to tackle it maybe from Nikki's angle, how do you restart your career after taking a stance, et cetera. I mean, I've had sort of a bit of opportunities, and also connected to you, Joyce. I'll give you a classic example. I mean, I went public in December last year, actually in November, October. I went public on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I went public that I was not going to go to COP26. COP26 in Glasgow. And the reason I was not going to go to COP26 was because of vaccine inequity. And of course, it was totally misconstrued and misunderstood in my agency. Oh my God, you're saying people are being racist to you, so you're not going, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was very clear and explicit that I say this because of vaccine inequity, because people on my continent were just not vaccinated, nor were they, the numbers were not in any way close to any part of the world, as it were. Of course, there were implications for that. You're not supposed to do that. You're a certain level of career in the UN, and of course, side messages. In fact, you need to just zip it, shut it. But what happened just a few days after my post was that the Secretary General was talking about vaccine inequity. The WHO head was talking about vaccine inequity. Who was not talking about vaccine inequity? Everybody was talking about vaccine, the racism that's connected to it, and the challenges of all of that. And you're right, Joyce. Yes, sometimes you say a specific word, you say something. I was within, one specific agency for a good 9 years. I was on the same position, passed on for a promotion, etc. But what I did with that, I flipped that around the belly. I used that to be a fellow with UPenn. I used that to write a lot of articles, to start writing my book. I started to be in spaces that were outside of the UN. And then what that did was even begin to threaten the status quo even more. Oh my God, she's been invited to speak there. What? Who knows about her? What? So you begin to find the balance. When do you speak? When do you not speak? But also at the same time, when do you empower others who may be in a much better position with no risk whatsoever to their roles to speak on our behalf? Because I've also been very, very quickly identifying those particular individuals. And the ancestors are very kind, because I will know which woman will not speak for me and which woman will speak for me, and the men who will speak for us and not speak for us as well. You just know from the energy, from the attack, from the angle. So you just know, and that in itself begins to really help out in really figuring out which direction we go. Over, and I see there's a question for Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting comment there. And yeah, I think the whole event is getting very, very interesting. So we have one last question. Please allow us to just use a few minutes to wrap up with this before we close. So I think Alicia is asking to Cheryl, how can we navigate the academic policy sector nexus in trying to advance climate justice as Black environmentalists? And how do we avoid staying siloed? I think this all goes back to what we are discussing right now. So over to you, Cheryl. I think you'll be happy to have your point on this.
Yeah, I appreciate that there's just a little bit of time, but I would say that when we're talking about climate justice, given that Black and racialized communities are bearing the burden, but we've seen from the pandemic that we're only as resilient as the most marginalized communities. So in that sense, lobbying for policy that's helping Black and racialized communities is helping everybody in that sense, if we really sort of look at a social inclusion framework. So, it's not like it's necessarily sort of siloing or just making it just a Black issue, but those policies that become sort of able to move forward in terms of climate justice will end up benefiting other groups and other sort of intersectional interests.
Great. Thanks for the brief answer to this. It's interesting to hear from you one more time. And at this point, I think, yeah, for the sake of time, myself, I would wish we can continue up to an extra 30 minutes or an hour, but we all know it's not possible because of other engagements. So I'll now wrap up and then, turn it over to Alice for the final closing remarks. Thanks.
I just wanted to offer an enormous thanks to our esteemed guests today, including our facilitator, who's done a lovely job. I think, one of the wonderful parts of having these dialogues is reflecting on our own individual career paths and how we become adept at opening up spaces that we might ourselves be closing off to others, and recognizing the decisions that we make in institutions, whether it's a higher education institution, whether it's something like the UN, whether it's something like the realm of the environmental sector. What does it mean for all of us to take responsibility to allow all of us to thrive and to follow our passions for carving a more sustainable and just future? I really appreciate the comments offered by Alicia, Cheryl, and Masunda today. Thank you for all that you have contributed on behalf of nature, on behalf of those who do not have opportunities in front of them and trying to open up those opportunities. And thank you for helping us learn today about the diversity of experiences and pathways out there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you all for taking part in this. And then we hope to see you again in our future events. So thanks, and yeah, bye-bye now.
Everyone have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.